let me tell you a story, a true story about two men. It begins with death and a lone German inventor's success. In the late 19th century, this lone German achieved a dream humans had attempted for centuries previous. He took a giant leap towards making the impossible not only possible, but every day, and he paid for it with his life. Perhaps in this way, bold people are crazy people. They immerse themselves so steeply in a single idea that others consign to fantasy. Bold people study and then test their vision over and over. In this case, the lone German inventor began his first experiments in 1891, attending schools, studying through observation, and writing a book. When he died, during a test run of his invention, his legacy and writings were open to others interested in the idea. It was an idea of breaking an impossible limit. Our Berlin graduates' experiments would not be perfected, however, until they were seized upon by two bachelors who happened to be the main characters of this true story. A single vision. Indeed, these two bachelors would remain single their whole life, unable to commit to wives while attempting to achieve the impossible, working together over many years. You may be wondering exactly what the invention was I am describing. However, it is besides the point of this story. This is a story about the human spirit and what it can achieve. Our two bachelors didn't carry out the 2,000 experiments of our German pioneer over the 23 years of his attempts. They didn't study technically at a university, neither attended one. They didn't do the breakthrough groundwork to uncover what definitely didn't work and was definitely too dangerous for mastery of this impossible. No. Yet they stand in the history books for taking a single leap, a leap made up of many steps, mistakes, musings, tests, and revisions. All people who gain mastery of a thing go through this process. Through this trial cycle, they gain rare powers and success comes to them, drawn like thieves to gold. Onto the story. The risks that killed our young bachelor's progenitor were very much still there. The fate of the dead German inventor loomed over them. Our two characters took more leaps forward with relentlessness. The relentlessness of an obsessed child, using his failure as motivation. Perhaps bold people know that doing something exceptional contains inherent risk and sacrifice. Success isn't guaranteed. Indeed, it is unlikely, the greater the dream is. But goals are a prerequisite, and hitting those goals must be the single mission to which all other actions are aligned. Even so, perhaps you cannot compete with true inspiration when that inspiration is combined with tireless dedication and multiple minds. Beginnings. Our first bachelor was born in 1861 in Indiana, and our second, 1871, Ohio. From author-historian David McCulloch, they, quote, lived in the same house, worked together 6 days a week, kept their money in a joint bank account, end quote, and as one of the bachelors said in his own words, even thought together. Multiple minds. They had this passion, this mission. They were obsessed to succeed, David continues. Something the historian wants to emphasize is that each time they ran trials of their world-changing invention, they were putting their lives at risk. Their story is at the heart of what it means to be bold. No getting around it. Dedication. Dedication to the point of mortal risk-taking. Where did this resolve come from? I might not have the answer, but they were certainly inspired. I mean, their house had no running water, no indoor plumbing, no electricity, no telephone. However, there were lots of books. The older bachelor had attended high school in Richmond, Indiana, and intended to go to Yale, but a hockey accident left him with no upper front teeth. He retreated from the world for 3 years, locking in his house, and eventually opened up a bicycle shop with the other bachelor. Over time, our young bachelors became no stranger to inventions, having custom designed their own sturdy bicycle designs during the bike craze sweeping the US at the time, after setting up a bike store together. Their lives, ingenuity, were their passion. Over time, they came to hold the same vision as the German pioneer before them who died, using his material as a basis for achieving and perfecting it, sinking into their natural instincts. Indeed, perhaps we only think of bold people as bold because they are riding the waves of genuine curiosity rather than money. Think of a writer with little passion trying to hit a zeitgeist and finding each word about as easy to conjure as plucking out teeth. Compare that to a Stephen King. From about 1896, they became completely obsessed with the Germans' idea. By 1901, they had gathered the necessary data to attempt their own designs with superior balance and abilities, requiring them to innovate controls and even to create a new lighter engine and a wind tunnel based on available literature. While their primary competition, named Samuel P. Langley, had huge government funds, the bachelors had a humble apprentice's mindset and a relentlessly pioneering spirit. For example, their initial designs had been based on flawed information, leading to the failure of their first test runs. But rather than give up, the bachelors built a wind tunnel and took the Verdison approach, taking out a range of shapes and comparing the effects of various forces. They shipped their contraption to the isolated dunes of North Carolina. Both also had a serious interest in photography and studied photos of other primitive designs in action. Their genius was a dogged belief that the impossible was possible, and that they only needed to learn solutions, which constantly required them to study and then replicate devices for measurement and understanding of the forces with which they are wrestling, most of which were created in their home accommodation. Any obstacle was merely a learning lesson through which they could gain a deeper insight into the single phenomenon humans have almost always been limited by, and the one our bachelors were determined to master. They improved on the German inventor's data rather than being put off by his fate, and even invented an engine to go along with a much more sophisticated variation of his designs. Their greatest contribution, however, was to create refined controls that would stabilize the invention and convert it from a novel toy to a marvel with highly practical uses, which would be exploited in World War I. 17th December 1903, our two singletons finally pioneer a solution to a human limitation that has been with us since our inception, sparking one of the most important revolutions in human history in a terrifyingly short period of time that we now take for granted. They wrestled with 600 pounds of spruce wood, muslin, and aluminium to do so, putting their bodies on the line. They done so 3 more times, watched in the act on the desolate beach by only a few birds, a man from a nearby town, a boy named Johnny Ward, and a few coastal lifeguards. Years later, the younger bachelor, Orville, described their feat as the following. It was the first time in the history of the world in which a machine carrying a man had raised itself by its own power in full flight, had sailed forward without reduction in speed, and had landed at a point as high as which it had started. This is when they really invented the art of aviation. The 1903 test run lasted 12 seconds and covered 120 feet. A second flight covered 175 feet, and a third covered 200. A fourth flight lasted 59 seconds and ended 852 feet from the takeoff point. The moment it happened, our bachelors knew they were onto something. They ramped up their tests on a cow pasture on the outskirts of Dayton. They tested larger, scarier, and more powerful machine designs. While the huge government-funded experiments crashed and burned, they still turned down our bachelors. To the government, our bachelors were nobodies in the aviation field. Indeed, our bachelors' world-first feat went largely unnoticed other than a few inaccurate news stories. Their flying base at Dayton, the cow pasture, would change things. Through 1904, they tested the scarier machines, trying out half circles. Then 5 days later, the first ever completely controlled circle. In 1905, they developed the first practical airplane, a beast of a wing-spanned machine that could fly long distances. But it took a flight over the town of Lamont in front of huge crowds to turn the bachelors into heroes. Other nations, particularly France, grew interested in their contraption. Only then did the US government take interest By this point, our bachelors had no competition, such was their advantage. In February 1908, the US Army accepted their bid for a machine costing a whopping $20,000. By this point, the bachelors were internationally famous. Even the Army would purchase the first military airplane in history from them. Over this period, they perfected heavier-than-air flight into something self-powered, controlled, manned. In order to achieve it, the two non-graduate shop owners had to equip themselves with a quite complete understanding of the forces at work during aviation, winning a military contract, training many aviators using this scientific detailed understanding of why their invention worked, having built every inch of it, and gaining a host of honors. Of course, I am describing the Wright brothers. Other aviators had taken leaps beforehand. Literally, Otto, the German aviator I mentioned at the beginning of the story, leapt from a natural hill, was hit by a powerful wind mid-flight, and fell 15 feet to his eventual death. Also, Brazilian aviator Alberto had managed to take off with a heavier-than-air machine, however, was only able to move in a straight line. The Wright brothers stand out for their humble and careful analysis of designs that had come before with those that were available. Working tirelessly in a bike shed, they were willing to throw out old preconceptions with the curiosity of a child. While the German Otto had been sure bird flight was the key to human aviation, they took on the advice of an engineer named Chanute. Chanute was the foremost American engineer of his day, a bridge builder. Chanute convinced the brothers to give up their idea of bird-shaped wings, as their predecessor Otto had believed in, and to instead to go for a stronger double-winged design. Previous to this, like Leonardo da Vinci, the brothers had spent a great deal of time observing birds in flight, but they were open to the idea of an alternative approach, which turned out successful. Chanute encouraged them to find a windy location to run flight tests. The brothers also wrote to the Smithsonian in order to gain as much knowledge as possible about aviation. Note, the Wright brothers took risks, mortal risks, flying at 30 miles per hour with large planes. For example, on 17th September 1908, Orville Wright took up a young US Army lieutenant named Thomas Selfridge on one of his Wright planes. The plane crashed after a propeller splintered, leading to the first fatality from a plane. Orville Wright survived, but young Selfridge did not. Orville was badly injured and nursed by his sister. However, she feared he might never walk again, let alone recover psychologically or physically enough to fly again. The incident shook both brothers, who learned from the crash and worked on stronger materials for turbines, again displaying relentlessness. And Orville did recover and did fly again. Push. Curiously, Orville Wright came to believe it would be impossible to fly transatlantic distances because no motor could last long enough. Orville called the idea absolutely foolish. This was proven wrong in Orville's lifetime, and is perhaps a note to all bold people to question limits with the reckless curiosity of a child, then to test those discoveries further. The brothers done this previously. They went from quad handheld gliders to manned gliders, tested out at Kill Devil Hills, performing hundreds of successful glides. After this, they used rudders, giving them more maneuverability in the air. With the added maneuverability, they decided it would be possible to increase the power with a motor. And thus, from about 1900 to 1908, they tested and improved designs, learning from crashes and creating solutions, such as a wind tunnel, to do so. Not all bold people are masters. However, combining boldness with mastery, with the approach of an apprentice willing to learn from all, has the most realistic potential to create rare powers and advantages over the competition. Genuine inspiration may be a prerequisite, the only thing capable of propelling you through defeats, the time required to attain success, and the uncertainty of success ever being attained. But the Wright brothers stand as an example of the right ingredients and the impossible alchemy it can lead to. Ultimately, in under 60 years, aviation would take us to the moon. Bold people carry an instinct about them. Who says what its limits are when cultivated and pushed. Well, that's their story, their true story. What will be yours?